everyone, it's Kristen. Just a quick heads up, it's going to be a few more minutes. We're just setting things up. We will start in just a moment. Hello again, everyone. We're just testing this fun audio situation, seeing if it improves anyone. Again, we'll be starting in just a few moments. We're just getting things set up here. Hello again, everyone. We are just finalizing setting everything up. Thank you so much for your patience. We are very excited to have Dexter Roberson here today. Dexter's background is a balance of both private sector and public service experience. His career began as a project manager for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency to transition defense manufacturers from the use of paper-based business process to digital channels to conduct business more efficiently with the federal government. He went on to become the Vice President of Technology Development for Charles Schwab, where he created the Rapid Application Development for the Internet organization and pioneered agile development with the Schwab culture. He left Schwab to start his own consultancy focusing on managing programs, products, and projects. And also his public service experience, which we mentioned, includes serving as a legislative aide or assistant in the California legislature, a city council aide in the city of Oakland, the supervisor aide in Contra Costa County, a chief of staff for a supervisor in Alameda County, among others. Dexter also has project management and business teaching experience. And Dexter, I don't know if while we're just finalizing everything here, if you want to go over quickly a few of the topics that you'll be presenting on today.
Absolutely. Let me. We're experiencing some latency, some issues with the presentation, so forgive me for that. But yes, let me. Some of the things I'll be going over in this presentation are, I want to talk about the general approaches to project management. So I want to kind of baseline and say really there are two dominant methodologies when managing projects. We'll go over that and I'll talk about that a little bit. I also want to talk about some of the two key areas, challenging areas in a project that are very general, but it's the notion of ambiguity and how you deal with ambiguity in a project and what the impact of ambiguity can be, and basically how you should respond to it. Also, just the general notion of change in a project.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Heard it yet? No, that was the problem, one of the problems. So, I apologize for that, but we can just continue.
Okay, no, rolling on. And so the other piece is, so we've got ambiguity, we've got change. They're very related, obviously. And then we have the key individuals, such as our stakeholders. And how do we manage and deal with stakeholders, prompt them, literally manage them? How do you do that relationship, particularly when they have power in an organization and you may not? We'll talk about some of the skills that you may need to deploy when you're dealing with ambiguous situations that have lots of change with challenging stakeholders. And I call them the essential project manager skills. And so we'll talk about what those are. And actually, I'll tell you what they are. Conflict resolution, your own emotional intelligence, your own EQ, emotional intelligence. You need to be able to manage to look at yourself, how others look at you, and et cetera. I'll go into that a little bit, not too much, but it is an important variable. And then dealing with project level change, not just the organizational change you're dealing with in an organization. When you step in, you're new to the organization, relationships form, et cetera, but literally the mechanics of managing change in a project. So getting a hold of the changes taking place and then managing it through. And when you're dealing with a challenging project, it looks like my screen, dealing with a challenging project, you often have to understand, why am I struggling here? What are the challenges I'm having? And you guys are I think you're in the midst of your project. Is that the case? The perfect time to be experiencing disillusionment and fear. This is not new. These are not secret words. This is not anything we hide. This happens in a project. It's fairly normal. But you need to be able to identify why this is happening, zero it out, and fix it. So kind of a root cause analysis on that. And then the process of recovering yourself in the project. So what are those steps? These are concrete steps that I'll give you that you can consider and see if they apply to your particular project. And then we'll talk about tools. That is my tool slide is a blank slide, but I deal with lots of tools, and I want to kind of understand your situation before I tell you what tool you should consider using. Otherwise, you may take it as gospel and run it and get yourself in trouble. And then any questions that you might have that I can answer. So let's dive right into the first set of slides. Is this me? Mm-hmm. Oh. No, I was at the at that.
In which case we can just... Oh, okay.
Oh, just a little latency, okay. I'm going to regret putting header slides in. So forgive the latency that it takes a little bit for the slide to catch up after I punch it. So I'll dwell on my slides as much as possible and extract the maximum value from them. So you see project approaches on the screen, and in that, I'm beginning to talk about the two methodologies in the project. The most common method for managing project, the most common methodology is the Waterfall Methodology. It's the default way of managing projects. And what is that? Essentially, it's a process that has basically 5 groups in it, 5 processes: initiating, planning, executing, and closing, and then monitoring and controlling throughout the entirety of the project. This is the most basic form of managing a project. It has a body of knowledge associated with it. So, for example, you can go out and get certified as a project manager in this methodology. Lots of government organizations believe in the waterfall method of managing projects. And what does it mean? So what are these processes comprised of? The first is an initiating process. You define your project, right? You state your goals and objectives. You begin to scope out what the scope is. You develop an initial scope statement. I'm not going to I'm going to only hit the ones that are major. You see some of them are in red, and I'm going to focus on those.
Change the word control.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. And then you want to understand what the deliverables are. These are concrete things. So you need to understand what's the scope, what are our goals, what's the scope of work, so what are the deliverables within that scope, and what is success? Like, please define these for me. And it is your job as a project manager to drive towards specificity on these things. Otherwise, you don't really know if you're done, if you're successful. You allow the atmosphere of ambiguity can be allowed to grow and fester. The other things you want to know are what are the assumptions that you're operating under, and so what are the constraints? Does this project need to be implemented by X date? Are you working on any particular regulations or anything like that? And then you capture all of this information via what's called a project charter. So have you all actually done any project charter? Have you done a project charter? Okay. And so that is the document that helps you to like capture and document, the key things: goals, objectives, scope statement, deliverables, success criteria, and any assumptions. And so doing this early on in the project is extremely helpful. And we'll talk about later on and how that hasn't happened, what you can do to help yourself. Moving on to the planning phase. I'm not going to go on a lot of detail in the planning phase, but know that it's the part where you're actually constructing how you're going to do the project. And one key thing, if you go through all of that, you want to get sign-off on your scope. In planning, your scope is defined. So you can be, when you get to the execution phase, you're executing against your scope, which has been defined. We know that change happens in a project, so your scope can change. The real issue is managing that change, and we'll get to that a little later. So you get your scope signed off on, you get your schedule signed off on, and you get your cost signed off on. A lot of project managers in both the public and private sector, but especially in the private sector, don't always manage their own budget. That's often done at a program level or within a department. But you want it signed off nonetheless because you want to know what kind of funds you're working against. The executing role or process is one that, literally you're executing the project. You're doing the work of the project. And the closing piece, which is ignored in lots of spaces, is when you wrap up the project formally, capture lessons learned, and then transition. The monitoring and controlling effort is literally the process of just monitoring and controlling your work in each of these phases. And so that's the Waterfall methodology. Again, it's predominant, it's the default. However, I did it. I'm not an Apple user, so I'm going to sound like your grandma, maybe. So the Agile methodology is a newer methodology. It is the methodology that I work on the most now, and it's adapted and it emerged for change because it handles change a whole lot better than the waterfall methodology typically. Waterfall is a methodology that is best suited in environments where you kind of know what you're doing, you kind of know what the plan is. You know, everything is in a known environment with known players. Waterfall works just fine. It is definitely a process that's delivered a lot of value. However, we're not often in situations where you have everything known up front. And so we moved to Agile methodology. And so let's go over those processes. So you have a process that envision. This is an analog to the initiation process in Waterfall. So where you really focus on developing your project charter and you capture scope, objectives, stakeholders, success, all those key things that you do in the initiation process, you do in the envision process. And then the speculation step is where you do your planning. The additional step there, well, a key step there is you identify your risks and issues. So we know that we're going to have challenges in the project. And what you need to do, what you often need to do as a project manager is capture and identify risks and issues. You also do this in Waterfall, not to say that they don't, but it's a particular focus on in the Agile methodology. And so you want to be able to document those, understand them, and let me tell you something about your risk and issues that you might want to do. So sometimes the organizational challenges that you face pose a risk to the success of the project, and you want to state them as risks. And let me make the difference between risk and issues, because this can be an ongoing debate in organizations. A risk is something that might happen. An issue is something that is happening. And so if you ever wonder about that, you can solve that issue in your head. So it's you want to plan for your risk. You want to identify if this happens, we will do the following. So you want to have a risk contingency. So all of those things that you think might happen, you want to think through a contingency. Now, to be realistic, will you always have an answer? No, you won't. But it serves you as a project manager to identify the risk and let everybody know that this could happen. And if this happens, this is the likely impact. This is a proposed contingency to it. You know, so you make that effort to always manage and capture those. We'll go into that in more detail. I don't really want to dwell on it right now. The next step in the Agile process is explore, and this is the process where you're actually doing the work. This is an analog to the execution process. The difference here is that you have daily meetings in Agile, daily meetings. The meeting lasts for 10 to 15 minutes. Excuse me, 15 to 30 minutes. So they're not long meetings. They're not supposed to be. You don't bring up long, drawn-out issues in an Agile meeting. What you do, you talk about what you did yesterday, what you're going to do today, and any blockers, anything that's prohibiting you from doing your work. And so it can be very effective for holding team members accountable. In fact, I have implemented Agile in a few very large companies, and the greatest resistance for the purpose of increasing productivity, but also to increase accountability. It is also a methodology that divides power a little bit more. It attempts to flatten the organization because you have lots of capable people in an organization, and they can give input if they're part of the team on the process. So you can have people giving input. They have a good idea. Hey, let's use that. Also, there's a focus on interaction between the project manager and your end customer, whoever that is. Let's say your stakeholder. And so you focused on interaction with the stakeholder. Another key difference between Waterfall and Agile is that Waterfall has lots of artifacts that you create, lots of documents that you create, lots of process. Agile trades that off for more direct communication. Why? Well, we know that 80% of projects fail because of communication issues. And so we know that, well, if you can increase the amount of communication, then you're likely to have better outcomes. And that's partly why it's structured the way it is. The adapt part is relatively new. It's a unique feature of Agile, and it's where you review things with the stakeholder and with key members of the team. Again, holding them accountable. And you do this frequently or at key points. And so before the product is finished, you review pieces with them. And so that you're always doing these course corrections. So this is when the change can come in. And so they may see something that oops, we didn't mean to say it that way. And, you review the scope and say, so are we saying that we need to change the scope piece here? And, have that discussion, either gets changed or doesn't, and you move back on. The other key difference between Agile and Waterfall is that Waterfall delivers the solution at the end of the project. And so the goal is that we're building a space shuttle, and at the end of this time, we're going to deliver a space shuttle. Whereas in the Agile methodology, you're delivering value in increments. And so the notion is that you take your giant project plan, you break it up into, say, we're going to have what we call several iterations or sprints. We're going to break this up into 8 sprints. And at each sprint, we're going to deliver the following, value. So sprint 1, you may deliver the node section. Sprint 2, you deliver the wings. So you have measurable, viewable value that is happening throughout the course of the project. It motivates people. Stakeholders see value, and they feel like they're getting a bang for their buck. So it can be a powerful way of managing projects to be able to show that we're delivering things at these different intervals. So those are the 2 dominant methodologies, Waterfall and Agile. Agile comes in lots of different flavors. And so, for example, we're really talking about here, when I'm talking about Agile, I'm talking about the most popular methodology in Agile. It's called Scrum, kind of, related to rugby. And so that's those are the methodologies. So now that we have some grasp and understanding of these are the methodologies that are used to manage projects, let's talk about some of the challenges associated with managing projects. Well, we know that at the beginning of a project, no matter how well you plan it, sometimes you're going to encounter lots of ambiguity. And can we minimize that control ball panel?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Sorry. You notice at the top, it's forming, storming, and norming. And we'll go into this a little bit more, but and many of you probably heard about this notion by Tuckman. And this was identified in 1965. It's quite old. It does spell out some of the phases in projects. But let's stick with ambiguity for a moment. So we know at the beginning of a project, ambiguity is quite high. And you know that there's your stress as a project manager. You've tossed in, what? You're going to feel some stress. Also, you're going to be challenged. People are going to question your authority. There's going to be confusion. The wheels might feel as though they're flying off. And you're going to have team conflict. So this is a relatively normal dynamic in a project. So if you felt this and wondered what's going on, this is a dynamic that you will encounter on many projects and you will have to overcome. But if you're successful in surviving the change cycle, then you will, on the other end, you'll start to have greater teamwork, and collegiality. I would just say that a lot of groups do not always reach the collegiality piece, but it can certainly hit teamwork. Sorry, I'm having a... Let me go a little deeper into the storming, norming, and forming piece. So it's a curve that you will most certainly encounter. It's called the change curve. As I mentioned, your authority will be challenged. So when that happens, what do? Well, you define your goals. So you have goals. You stay focused on your mission and say, well, these are the defined goals we're going after. Define responsibilities. So for example, if the roles and responsibilities have not been clearly delineated, your goal will be to try to clearly delineate them. So you try to address that issue, and so that you're very clear about who's doing what and when and what they're supposed to be doing. And you answer their questions. I'm sure you do that, of course. So if there's lots of questions flying at you, you try to answer them. The other storming piece, you often see lots of power struggles, right? So the team has difficulty making decisions. Again, you maintain your focus. You facilitate decision-making between the different entities that are in conflict on your team. The norming part is, this is when we've moved out of the valley of despair, and you're starting to see effective team collaboration. Your role, when you begin to see this is to continue to find ways to build and maintain morale within your team, the organizations that you touch. And again, the collegiality. This is a beautiful situation. I can count on my hand the number of times I've entered this state of utter collegiality. You never want to leave. Why is this team disbanding? This is awesome. You want to keep that going, but everybody's on the same page. You don't need to supervise your team a lot. They're like self-motivated. And again, we may not always get there, but it's a wonderful thing when you do. So let's continue on about it. And how do we really deal with ambiguity? Like, it's in our face. Let's acknowledge it. It's like, you know what? We're in an ambiguous state right now, and we can expect this to go down. And a lot of our ambiguity is driven around the potential risk and issues that we're facing. Let's document those and begin to work with people to document what they think the risks are and what you think the risks are. Not every risk that someone says you might want to document, but there are a lot you won't want to. Review the ones that you know about. You may say K and KU. That doesn't mean Kansas State, Kansas University. It's another slide that I have right after this is the notion of knowns and known unknowns, made popular by Defense Secretary years ago. But anyway, so review the risk and issues that you know about. So look at your list. If you don't have a list, make a list. Review your list and say, okay, which of these are contributing to the notion of ambiguity in this project? And then, try to skillfully address these issues. What do I mean by skillfully address them? And so, have you ever written an email? This doesn't look like the crew that might actually write an email and just send it, But so you're thoughtful about your communication. You're thoughtful about communicating to different people in different organizations. You're very mindful about your communication and how you address a problem. But it is your job to address the problem. Basically, your project manager, you're not necessarily always going to be super liked. You will be liked, but it's more important that you'll be respected. Because some people see the tough project manager walk in the room and they go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know he's managing this project. And they'll respect you, and they'll listen to you. And the way you do that is really is to document the stuff we talked about up front. So in the initiation process and the planning process, so your scope, your goals, your success criteria. You're communicating those. When someone challenges those, you say, this is what they are. Is there a reason that we need to change this? Hear them out. If the change seems like a viable one, then you work with them to move it up to get approved, if you in fact have an approval process. Okay, that's acknowledge. So the other piece is identify. And this is all introduced this notion of a risk management plan. And I talked about it earlier, but informally. It's the notion of having a formal plan that identifies, basically says how you're going to manage and respond to risks. An outcome of that is a risk register, which is a list with columns that indicate whether or not you're going to, your response, your contingency, et cetera, and this can be very useful because they will come up. You will have risks, and what you want to do, one of the things that happens in projects and any social situations, people will point fingers. That is a natural reaction and happens in every single organization. And so one way to mitigate the impact of finger pointing is to actually document the risk and issues that might happen in a project. And so that we have a process for managing these risks and responding and dealing with the issues that we've encountered, and that helps you tremendously by just simply identifying them and actively managing them. As I mentioned in the track phase, really you've got a log now. You've got a list that you're actively managing, and you're noticing and you're reporting when a risk has either gone away or has now become an issue. In fact, you communicate before a risk becomes an issue. You talk about this risk is about to become an issue for us, or if the following things happen, this risk will become an issue that may impede and block the project. And so you communicate those kinds of challenges early. You don't wait for them to happen. You are proactively managing these kinds of challenges. The manage phase. Well, again, you work closely with your stakeholders and the members of your team to actively address the risk and issues. You try to make risks go away, and for issues as well. But since they're right there, they're happening now. You work with people to deal with them, and then again, you try to resolve them. And those are really the steps of managing ambiguity, because you have to actually label it. Is it a risk or an issue? And you're going to encounter some organizational issues that may feel kind of political to you. And so, for example, organization A does not like organizational B for whatever reason. They're resisting working with them. That's an issue. You need to call it out, but you need to do so skillfully, without getting personal. Just literally call out the issue, acknowledge it, and say, and have the rationale for why this is an issue. It impedes the progress of this project. Without the resolution of this conflict, I cannot move forward with the following steps or step. Just make it professional, clean, but call it out, because you'll have to do that in order to make the progress you need on your project. This is what I was referring to earlier. So there are knowns, there are states of information, states of activities that exist in a project. So for example, there's certain risks and issues that you know about. You know they exist, and you have the answer about it. You know everything about that risk or issue. You can talk about it. Then we have risks for which we know exist, but we don't have the answer yet. So for example, let's say we know that if it snows on the project that we cannot move forward, but we don't know if it's going to snow. It's that kind of thing. Then, of course, you have your unknown knowns. It's like you step outside and a pile of rocks hit you in the head. Now, these are the things that come out of the blue and surprise the project. You could not have anticipated them. They happen, and they affect the project. Now, I've added another one to the list, and I suspect many of you are beginning to understand this too. My addition to this list is the unknown knowns. These are the elephant in the room. So these are the things that no one wants to talk about, but are totally harming your project. And these can be really challenging. And in my work, I'm often brought in to work with company leadership. So I'm often working with the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, and then there may be a conflict between the CIO and the CTO and the CFO. That these are the big shots of the company. No one wants to say anything to these folks, and so these can be really politically sensitive. They're difficult for me to address. Again, I skillfully address them. I always address them, but it can be really challenging. So you actually need to call these out too. And so I wish someone would have told me this when I was starting out, because these impediments can be really challenging. But you need to call them out and describe them carefully, but very clearly, so that people know they exist and they are blocking the project. So nothing that huge that can prevent your project from moving forward should go unnoticed or unspoken. You must speak to it. And change. And this is why I stuck this slide in here, because I want to change. I want to maybe change the way you think about projects. And so we know that change is an inherent attribute of all projects, nearly all projects at least. And the question is not whether or not you'll have change, so we can often be frustrated by, why did that happen? Well, we know change is going to be tossed at us in a project. It's really how you handle the change. And so your perception should shift from, why is this happening to me, to, this is my job, I handle change. And I'm skillful at handling change, and I have tools and methods for dealing with them. And so, it's a mind shift, but it's one that you should take on early in your efforts to manage projects. Now, another key thing is if you're working with people and working in organizations, you know that the state of the organization has a tremendous impact on how you get things done. So if you're working with two organizations, one has this different way of looking at the world, and that might be easier to work in. Then you step into organization B, and oh my goodness, it's really challenging. They view the world as challenging, and they're kind of harder to work with. And so we know that this is real, and that keeping this in your head. So what I want you to try to do is manage any tendency to be reactive. because if as a project manager you get into the state of being reactive, so you walk into the difficult organization and your immediate reaction is, I'm upset and I don't like working here. You're already sucked into the reactive state, so you need to pull yourself back and say, okay, I'm a change manager, and so I need to figure out how I'm going to deal with this organization best. And this is that change curve I referred to earlier, and we saw a little bit of. It's it's a cycle that happens in your project. So you start with, and we're doing this awesome work that's important to the planet. This is really cool. And then you begin to get in there and you realize, like, oh my goodness, I have to work with these two organizations and they're in conflict. Oh my goodness. And you start to realize how complex it is. And as you move on and things start to stall and get challenging, you get this feeling of despair and disengagement. Why did this happen to me? Kind of a thing. And then, believe it or not, you climb out. It's possible to climb out of that valley of despair to kind of hope and clarity. Try to get to the baseline of this is going to work. This is working. We're going to do this. And then the change gets implemented. But this cycle does happen. So I'm focusing on the red. However, you see the green line. I went through that, and that's if there's this notion of change managers. Often, a lot of projects will literally bring in a project manager whose only job it is to facilitate the change within the organizations. And so they are like, we're going to shorten this cycle because this will burn us out. And so that's what they do. So I've done this work, and it's fun, but it's also exhausting because you're dealing with the meaty issues in an organization cycle and the resistance that you get across multiple organizations. I wanted to talk about this notion of the organizational structure itself. I have another slide we'll talk about too right after this. But many of you are working in organizations of different types. So for example, I suspect a lot of local government organizations are organized as functional organizations. And functional organizations are the organizations that you think of when you think of an organization. There's a department heads, they have people that work on them, they have those people, you have people that work on them, et cetera. You have, there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is followed and enforced. So that's probably, is that, can get some no, yes, is that kind of what you're working under? Okay. The next is the weak. You start to get into the matrix organizations where you get a weak matrix, a balanced matrix, and a strong matrix. And these are organizations where they start to weave in folks like project managers, product managers, business analysts, and and so some authority can be shared with these roles. So you have authority, and you are so you can kind of tell someone, hey, I'm going to need you to do the following, and they kind of listen to you. So you may have a blend of the functional with the weak, and so some of you may have, you have no authority. If you tell someone what to do, they'll go, that's nice, that's a total functional situation, That is a more challenging environment to work in. I have been a program manager in a fully functional organization where I was responsible, this is actually at Kaiser, where I was responsible for implementing some of the features you see on the website now. You can see your doctor, your nurse, all that kind of stuff. And we had deadlines. And it's really hard to people to do your deadlines when you can't fire them. I'm kidding about firing. When you don't have any authority over them, they're not intimidated by your presence. And so what do you do in that situation? Well, you know what I did? I pretty much moved to Pleasanton. That's where the IT organization was. And I made a lot of friends. I got to know the designers, the developers, their bosses. And so if I had a problem with someone who didn't want to, or was conflicted about the priority of their work, I wouldn't talk to their boss, not in a mean way. This was all, listen, hey, let's, so I understand that you're working on these two projects. I really need this by X date. How can I help you get this prioritized? And then you go talk to their boss. And if their boss, is resistant or something, You talk to their boss. And if you can't go that many levels up, then you have to go to a sponsor or a program and let them know. Again, you always call out your issues. This is keep it 100% real. You call out the issues. I'm having difficulty securing this resource to get this done. This is a real problem for me for the following reasons. And then you tell them. You try to pull back in your emotion. There's going to be some there often. You want to communicate clearly as possible that this is not personal. I literally need this done if this project is to succeed. And as you walk across the matrix organizational structure, the project manager gets more power. In a fully projectized organization, you almost have total power. People feel your presence or love you. Basically you have it's organized that the organization works by project. That's how they work. A lot of organizations are moving certainly into away from being completely functional. That's pretty. I have not encountered a fully functional organization in a while in the private sector. If I do, it's the old, it's old financial services or something. Certainly in the tech world, it's totally not the way that things are done. But so, know that if you're experiencing a dynamic like this is why it's not unique to you. This organizational structure is really challenging to work in. And then to make that worse and even more challenging is that you're working across multiple organizations who, and they all might be functionally organized. And so you're finding yourself, I am really frustrated with this. Again, the methods of being clear about your scope, being clear about your goals, being clear about what success looks like, and then having that signed off on and agreed to. Get people to sign off. But this is, this can be really challenging, and I want to acknowledge that that's definitely challenging. But it's also pretty normal. And working with one potentially beneficial thing in terms of your projects, that you don't have an international element. So you don't have the language and time barriers to deal with. That is another dimension of complexity that rolls into a lot of projects that you're not having to deal with. So thank goodness for that. This is kind of local, and you can manage. So let's talk about this. I'm kind of jumping the gun by talking about managing project change. So I'm going to talk about it again, but I think it's pretty. I want to introduce it relatively early in the process. It's there is a process called change control. It's called integrated change control. Maybe you heard about this. I don't know. But it's the notion that there's a structured process anytime someone introduces change to a project. So if someone wants to change something about the scope of the project, oh, I'm sorry, sir, that'll need to go through the change control process. Not as a bureaucratic response, but as literally we're managing our scope actively because we need to get this important work done. And so we're looking at any request for change. So you can make the request up. So people make a request to change. So they say, I want to change the scope, I want to change the schedule, I want to change the cost, or all, or part of that list. Okay, that's great. Can you submit that to me? Before it's submitted, it actually gets reviewed to see if it's worthy of being considered as a change request. Because important people typically review the change. So there's a change control board that, or a group of people that review those before they get approved or denied. So those folks get together, either virtually or in person, review the change, decide on its outcome, yes, no. Now, in order for that entire process to work, pretty much need to clear, again, scope, deliverables, success metrics. You need to know what the change is being looked at against. So you need baselines, so of your scope, your schedule, your cost, your deliverables, all those things we talked about earlier. Those give this process credibility. They give you credibility as well. So we'll get back to this a little later, but I wanted to introduce this to you. So we talked about the organizations, kind of organizations that you work in, right? And it can be really challenging to work with stakeholders and individuals in different organizations because they're going to have different tastes and different preferences. And so one of the things we want to understand about our key stakeholders is that we want to understand what their bias is toward change. You know, some folks can be really resistant to it and find it to be a pain, and some people. I've worked in organizations where this was completely the opposite. They so loved change, they always wanted to keep changing, and you needed to slow that down. That's pretty rare, but I did get a taste of it, and I thought, okay, that could be a real problem. So you know, you want to understand how they view change. Are they kind of resistant to it? You also want to understand how they view risks. Are they really risk averse? You know, so a lot of organizations can be really risk averse. A lot of, for example, if you're working with lots of engineering organizations, that there's a tendency toward risk. You know, risk in an engineered product can be a really big deal, and so there's a tendency to be really conservative about risks. So you want to understand what their perspective is on risk. Also understand what they think of any processes that you might be using. And so a lot of organizations do not like, especially up in the stakeholder ranks, if they have any management or executive responsibility, oh boy, some of them really don't like process. I just think you should get this done. Don't talk to me about your process. You know, and so that can be a real problem. But you want to understand, like, what's their attitude? And so when you go in to talk to them, you're not talking about process. You're talking about issues and risks. But you might want that person on your change control board, for example, if you can get them. Also, this notion of introducing the cost of quality. And what I mean by that is, you know, some people will make recommendations. I've noticed there's a correlation between people who have low tolerance for process. Well, like, how do we do it this way? And well, that way would wreck the quality of the deliverables. And so you want to introduce the notion of kind of talk about the impact of, you know, trade-offs on quality, and so that that's considered in the process. Get that in their head, and so that is something that people think about, so they won't try to cut to the quick in order to get something out the door, and then have what you just delivered be of little or no use. The other thing with stakeholders, this is something you just have to do with them. You need to prioritize your stakeholders. Not all stakeholders are going to be the same value to the project, not as human beings, but to the project. And so you want to prioritize them. And if you need help prioritizing them, either talk to the sponsor or the program level to help determine what that prioritization should be. I always use a method, and I have 3 levels. I don't create 100 levels of priority. Just a couple of buckets, 3 buckets. You know, they're primary stakeholder, secondary stakeholder, and a tertiary stakeholder. Then I describe what the primary, secondary, and tertiary actually means, so that it means something to me and not just like a label. And also categorize them by, so you may work to do it by department, if that makes sense for your project, or by, they represent this functional element of my project. So for example, these are the airborne people, or these are the people I deal with about air. These are the people I deal with about trees. That may be a department, or it may be a category. You know, so either way, you can categorize them in a way that makes sense to you. Why would you do that? Because it helps to talk about, if you're talking about stakeholders and talking to stakeholders, it helps to have kind of a common element. So if you're describing them to your sponsor, for example, and they want to understand, well, what's the problem? You have they can grasp department, they can grasp air, they can grasp, things they can get their heads around organizationally as you're talking about. These are people with, your sponsor, for example, will have lots of things in their head, so you need to make it as easy as possible when you talk to them. So that's why I think that's useful. All right, so the essentials for you as a project manager. Let's start with emotional intelligence. This isn't going to be like a psychology class, but this is a real thing. The project manager role is a lot of organizations are projectized, and so the project managers that tend to rise to the top are the ones that can manage themselves best. They're the least reactive ones. You will have some super passionate project managers who rock and get stuff done, but as they rock and get stuff done, they're actually making waves in the organization. It can be really challenging. And so you want to have people who are self-aware. They understand their own personal strengths and weaknesses, and that you're just like, I'm okay with that. I see myself. I do not. I have self-control. I don't lose it in meetings. If I do lose it in a meeting, it's a strategic response. I meant to lose it in that meeting. You have an awareness of others, what their strengths and weaknesses might be, and also you have the capacity to build relationships. This is so important in your scenario where you're working in functional organizations. These skills right here are probably your strongest assets, because you don't have power skills. You don't have the skills. You're not going out with a lightsaber. You don't have dark side or the force powers where you can you will comply. You will have to be persuasive and understand how you're being seen, how you see others, and then and with that knowledge, you'll be in a better position to build relationships. You're just trying to be victorious, and you will deploy these skills to help you. You won't manage yourself because you just want to win. I want to see this product successful, so what do I need to do that myself to make that happen? And I think that's what these skill sets are about. The other key thing is you're going to have to negotiate. Hopefully your negotiation is a conversation that leads to agreement. And it'll have to be super formal. But you'll probably need to negotiate stuff with people on a pretty frequent basis. And so, you have the distributed bargaining where you're basically, win-lose, where you're going to say, well, in order for that to happen, we're going to have to do the following things, and that, that's one way of negotiating. You may be in a scenario where it's inherently that way. Another way to negotiate, if the scenario allows, is that it's interest-based. Like how can I help you? How can we help each other? And that is obviously a more effective way of negotiating. And if you can frame your this is not deceptive. I'm not trying to encourage you to be deceptive. But if you can frame your distributive bargaining in that way, then you should do so. It's more effective. Let's talk about these. Actually, I meant to look at my notes. So anytime you go into a negotiation, you need to prepare for it. Even if it's a small negotiation, you be prepared. Show up. The person that shows up prepared almost always wins. And so, so prioritize what it is that you are willing to, prioritize what's important to you before you negotiate. So before you step in that room or that coffee shop, or get on the phone, have a priority. Map your concessions. Well, if I give up this, I'm going to want this. And you prepare this up front. So you do this ahead of time so that you are not in a position of panic or caught off guard, or it's harder to catch you off guard because you have a response. It's almost like your risk register, your risk list, where you say, this is the risk, this is my response to the risk, this is the impact if I lose this or this happens. And so, have that ready before you go into any negotiation. I always find that it's useful. I try to keep my negotiations informal as possible, but serious. Occasionally, you'll go into one which is inescapable. It's like you have one stakeholder on this side and who you're aligned with, another stakeholder on that side, and there's some other group of people aligned with. You're getting in a room, and basically it's a proxy war. The stakeholders sit back on the side and watch the two consultants discuss. And so you want to nonetheless be prepared. So those folks who walk in unprepared are often in for a surprise. And will often, one of the latest negotiation I did was in a financial services company. We were redoing a marketing tool, like revamping their entire process for marketing. And a company that used to dominate the marketing space, that used to be the Adobe of the world before Adobe emerged, is trying to make a comeback. Their CEO was in the room. They didn't really need their product, at least from my perspective. I mapped out the reasons why and everything. So he didn't do that. He literally came in the room. He was going to just give the super persuasive, charming sell. And, he was not successful in that negotiation, and he got really emotional, which harmed him because it harmed him. And so basically, you want to be the prepared one as much as possible. So you're going to have conflicts. Sometimes even your best efforts will result in conflict. And the people in conflict feel like they're being deprived of something, violated some norm or some rule. And they're pretty upset about it. You're going to encounter different ways of conflict. And I'm sure you've probably encountered, if you're working with enough organizations, you've encountered this already. And just in life, you will encounter this. Some people will seek to totally avoid you. It's like, they're avoiding you, and that's just the way it is. Some people seek to suppress the issue. What issue? There's no issue. I don't know why you keep saying that. It doesn't exist. So you'll encounter that. And then you get to the more sophisticated responses, of resolution. So there is a conflict. It's real. But there's a goal toward, acknowledging, yes, we're in conflict here. Yeah, we need to resolve this. Let's resolve this. So at least there's the degree of civility and understanding that we need to resolve this issue. You want to be here whenever possible. And then you get to the super cool, rarely experienced transformational negotiations or conflicts, where it's like, you know what, we have this conflict, but because we have this conflict, this affords us an opportunity to really take a look how we're working together. That's rare, of course. You see that on movies. But it is, it's a cool way if you can actually get there. Well, how do you handle, when you're in a conflict and it's contentious and people are on you? Do you stay focused on the problem? It's a trend. Don't let be pushed off the issue. Stay focused on what the actual issue is. Here's a key tactic. You often repeat what you hear. Someone says something outrageous to you. Repeat the outrageousness back to them. Do you mean to say that blah, 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 blah? And so they get to hear what they're shooting at you with. And so that really helps. Also, it helps when you depersonalize something. If someone's really upset about a particular issue, and they're frustrated and they're talking in frustrated tones, it may get slightly personal. What you want to do is relabel it and name it back to the impersonal and give it a name so that you can stay focused, and don't get pulled into the emotional state of arguing. So again, really work to depersonalize things as much as possible. And it helps keep it really professional, even in the heat of battle. I stuck this in here because this is another change thing. You all realize this, I think, by now. It's this notion there are three ways to derail your project. I'm kidding. But there are three areas of change. Scope, of course, schedule, cost. This is why you baseline these things. Baselining helps give you credibility. I will admit that it can be hard to baseline your schedule because you might be tweaking it on a daily basis. But at some point, you baseline it and say, this is the schedule we're going off of. So all changes related to the schedule are being compared to this. So I can say we are now behind X% as a result of these changes, because you've drawn the line. And cost, same thing. It's rare that if you get more money, it's often that money gets shuffled around and moved, and you lose money in a project. If that happens, you have to revisit scope and schedule. So any change in any of these causes you to take a look at the other two. And so that's real, and trying to keep people really honest about impacts on either of these three areas. So I talked about, we talked about change, we talked about things that can derail the problem, but let's take a look at things that can actually cause problems in the project. Let's also talk about the other things that happen in a project that can, from the beginning, cause you harm. Things that we can talk about how to fix, but you need to know that they can be problematic, and you need to introspect to see if you have these problems. So requirements. Are the requirements for the project inaccurate or incomplete? And some of this is okay. If you find that the requirements that drive your project are inaccurate or incomplete, you now know that they're inaccurate and incomplete and can try to do something about them. The scope is poorly defined. So the scope is never locked down, and so it's constantly evolving. You need to lock the scope down. You need to define what we're going to do in this finite period of time. So you need to actually lock it down. And also, as you're doing this, and I don't think this is a problem for this organization, is that so you don't have a lot of process overhead, at least not yet. So you want to be mindful of project process overhead. And what do I mean by that? So in lots of organizations, project managers have lots of additional work. You heard me say risk management plan, your issue log. There are lots of, each of the processes in the waterfall have lots of artifacts, lots of documents that go with them. And if you try to do all those artifacts, prepare all those documents for your project, you would be spending time on overhead instead of actually working on the project. So I'd be mindful of how much overhead that you're involved in. And if you've got a lot, you need to talk to people about it and get advice on how to deal with it, if in fact that's a problem. Let's go to stakeholders. We talked about this before a little bit, but you sometimes can have unacknowledged or unmanaged stakeholder disagreements. So there may be people in organizations that have a conflict and it's not been called out. It's not on your risk register yet. You want to skillfully put it on a risk register, and describing it in a way that allows it to be written down, but doesn't get you in a tremendous amount of trouble. But you'll need to do it because you want to call out things that block your project. Stakeholders are unavailable. That is a risk to your project. You want to call that out. This can be a common problem. Stakeholders get a project. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Sure. This is awesome. And then it's hard to get them.
Too much.
And so let me tell you my tactics. Other than putting it on a risk or an issue register, if it's happening now, it's an issue. Is that if you can't camp out, I would be merciless about finding my stakeholders. I will take my little computer, go sit in an area in an entranceway, and work there, angle myself so I can see them come and they're going. Oh, excuse me, ma'am. I wonder if I could talk to you briefly as I walk you to the car. Just whatever you have to do to get them, hang out in the lunchroom, and for critical things where they're not being responsive to you. And also the notion of escalation. So if you got it on an issue or risk register, particularly the issue register, it's happening now, you have to let that know that that's an issue that I'm experiencing and that this is a challenge because of the following project task cannot be completed. The impact would be a delay to the project, not be successful, blah, blah. So you begin to describe what the impacts are, but you call it out, that this person's unavailable to me, and as a result, I can't get these decisions made or whatever your challenge may be. Again, this is the next one of the poor dispute resolution and communication among stakeholders. Again, if they are not willing to always talk to each other or they have disputes that are not unresolved, you want to call that out as a risk. Also, you get the one impact of all the stakeholder stuff is it delayed decisions. Delayed decisions need to be called out. They really, really hurt. And so, and called out to them too in the nicest way possible. Again, you're a project manager about making the project happen. You're getting things done. And these leaders and stakeholders have, they may be working in a functional capacity, completely operational. And so their world is very important to them because they're getting things done in their job on a daily basis. However, so your project you need to kind of prod a little bit more, show up in their face a little bit more, escalate a little bit more, but all professionally, all done professionally. No, personal stuff, just literally, this is a challenge. I need your attention. I'm grateful for your attention. Another challenge that you'll encounter, moving away from stakeholders, looking at the resources becoming unavailable. So you might have been promised awesome resources, or perhaps no resources. You walk in and you have to try to recruit resources in your project. And so that is a challenge. You're going to face times when you don't have resources or they've been moved off your project. Again, you need to flag that because you can't accomplish your goal if you have the resources to do it. And that gets on an issue and risk list. There should be an assumption that I will have the staff necessary, available staff to do this project. Otherwise, why get the funding to do the project if the staff's not available? So that's worthy of calling out, worthy of escalation, and letting people know that this is the problem for the project. Also, another thing is that you may have a team, but there's a low sense of ownership. There's no motivation to actually do the work. See evasiveness. Begin to see, just a low allegiance to your project. You might want to flag that too. I always flag those. I mean, because you're trying to get things done. So we talked about this a little bit, and that's the challenge of managing projects in a matrix organization. But we didn't talk about the solutions, and I want to talk about some of those. So, what are the challenges? Responsibility without authority is probably the worst feeling on the planet. Again, we talk. You're in a functional organizational structure, kind of feeling that quite a bit. Also, if you're working with multiple organizations, you have misaligned goals. So you're working in a big program, lots of impact, and as a result, there are going to be misaligned goals, no question. And so you want to address that. Unclear roles and responsibilities, and so this is not terribly unusual, but you'll want to, especially for your key roles, define the roles and the responsibilities of those roles, and so that you reduce the ambiguity of at least that piece of it. Ambiguous authorities. So you're not sure who's in charge of making the call. Well, I would say dig into that because you can find that out. So go after that. So if you have that ambiguity, go directly after it. Get someone to make a call on who decides what. Even if you have to say, okay, for this part of it, you make the following 3 decisions. After that's decided, it's handed off to so-and-so. They make the call. You just need to map it, power map that, and understand who makes the decision on any piece of any decision you made that someone is, saying, it's not my department, I don't really do that. You need to find that out. Also, you have the challenge of also working in when you're working with multiple organizations, you'll often get siloed employees. And so, like, they just do this. Their allegiance is to their department, perhaps organization. And so, working with another organization, collaborating with them might be harder for that individual because they've worked in this structure for so long that they're only accustomed to working with so-and-so. So you get a siloed attitude, and that can be really challenging too. So how do you fix this? Well, you define, you try to cultivate the ability to work across the organization so that and again, the way that I know how to do this best is I make myself present. I'm present at the organization. I am building relationships. You also want to try to model. This may be above the project manager's role, but again, just acknowledge how you deal with this, is that you define what that relationships look like. This is how you work successfully in this project. This is what we need to do to be successful working together with these 3 or 4 organizations, achieving this goal. So you define that, and also you kind of provide, training is probably the part you can't do. I don't know if you can get everybody together. Let me train you on how to do this, how we work together. But that can be useful. But your skill that you can bring to the situation is things we talked about. Your negotiation skills, your self-management skills, so that again, managing how you're perceived, understanding how you perceive others and how others are perceived. Your ability to manage yourself, your own emotional reactions, and your ability to build relationships. And then your conflict resolution skills. Again, the EQ and conflict resolution skills go together, because if you're going to resolve conflicts, you have to remain pretty calm and collected, and not withdraw. That's the other reaction that could happen when folks think, I'm avoiding this issue, I'm withdrawing from it. And as a project manager needing to get something done, that's probably don't want to do that and stay focused on the issue. Or if you can't get it resolved, you flagged it successfully as a risk, as an issue, acknowledge that I can't get this done with these following blocks in the way. And if that's the most you can do, that's the most you can do until those issues are resolved. And that would be a good response in those situations. We talked about the notion of the root cause. You want to understand why am I having challenges? We talked about a lot of challenges, but in a general sense. But again, the sponsor. Is the sponsor engaged? Does the sponsor have any span of control to impact the organization? So, for example, we were back on the matrix chart, the chart where for organizations. What's the authority of the sponsor? Do they have the power to reach in to those organizations? Can they also prioritize work? The sponsor probably can't prioritize work of an individual at their desk, but they can encourage a stakeholder to allow the person to work on something because we need to get this done, at this time. So those are the times when you actually engineer a phone call. Try to engineer phone calls or conversations that can I get you to talk to so-and-so because I need X person on their team to do this work for like 3 days or whatever the period of time. And then we'll get us back on track, or we'll be able to accomplish this goal or a significant step of it. Those kinds of things. So you want to understand, does your sponsor have that kind of juice, or your stakeholders too? Can they also do those kinds of things? You need to understand are the organizational conflicts, within the pre-existing organizational conflicts. How is your project viewed? Is it a low, high priority within the organization? Is there any organizational engagement relative to your project? Are they really into it? At this point in your project life cycle, you know this. You probably know this. And again, let's look at the scope. Again, we talked about scope changes, but when you look at the scope, is the scope achievable? Like, can we actually do this in the period of time that you have now that you've actually immersed in the situation and have a better understanding? Is the current state system know or agreed upon? So, for example, if you're trying to change something, do you know what you're trying to change from? So, is the as-is state actually understood? Is the to-be state, the future state that you're trying to get to, is agreed upon? Is it agreed upon? Probably not if you're having some conflict among organizations. Is agreement on what success looks like? Again, have the notion of this is what success looks like. Being very clear about that and trying to get some agreement amongst key players on what that is. And I'm sure some of you guys have figured this out or experienced this. Sometimes you may have someone who's relatively low in an organizational structure that is tremendously powerful because they have been there for 15 years and they have all the knowledge in the organization, and often a key stakeholder may defer to that person. That can also happen in lots of projects, and that person, I treat that person as a stakeholder because an informal stakeholder because they have so much influence. So if you encounter that, I would take that approach with those kinds of persons. Treat them as kind of an informal stakeholder. Other issues that you may encounter that may be root cause issues on your project are is the project staffed appropriately, and have the conditions that prompted the project in the first place changed. In your situation, that's probably not the case, but so you have the notion of doing a project, and by the time you get around to executing it, or as you're executing it, the reasons for the project have shifted or changed. And so these are things that you want to understand as you're doing a project, so that you can affect any course corrections within your project. Now, we talked about the change control process before. I wanted to expose you to it, know that there is a process for actively managing change in your project. And so, again, you create a simple process for a project team to formally request change. So you want to do that. So they are formally requesting a change. They know they've been oriented. You've trained them to actually ask in this way. Get submitted, hopefully, to you, or you're aware of the submission, so that you can do any screening. I think I'd like to change the project so we get ice cream every Friday. Well, that's not a change you want to submit. That doesn't actually make it. You don't want your busy stakeholders to see that change request. What are you guys working on? So, you review them prior to submission. Then you analyze them against your baseline, against your scope baseline, your cost baseline, and your schedule baseline. Again, I'm a little flexible on schedule a little bit, only because I know how tough it is to actually keep your schedule like current. And the only way to keep a project schedule current is to never close the software you use to manage it, and that's the only way I do it. It's like I live in this thing. I can't not clock it. It never closes. But nonetheless, you want to evaluate any change, especially against your scope. You need to know if it changes, and so that's the criteria that's being evaluated against, and then a decision is made. Well, how do you create a change control process? One way is to talk to the program about it, and you might want to beta. This is something you might want to test first, and see if does it make sense to actually have a process for controlling change in the project. And so if yes, okay, let's test this out. You can create a form or a process to submit. I tell you what, this is when process overhead can become a problem. But it'd be great if you had a portal. It was online. They typed it in, and it went to a system in a database, and everybody reviewed. Okay, that's probably not going to happen. And so you create a form that people fill out and email, and then send it to one person, then who aggregates them and creates a list. And so that's one approach to creating it. And then you recruit the members, of course, to review the stakeholder, the request. And this needs to be a credible list of people, or the most credible list of people you can get. You need to be realistic. Are you always going to get your sponsor on this? Probably. But you may get key stakeholders. And if you're seeing that the change control board or your group that you're putting together is a biased change control board, weighted with organization B people and not organization A and C people, it's probably not a good process. You need to start from scratch, or insist that it be balanced, and so that you get decisions. This, oddly enough, can really create a lot of camaraderie on a project, because it gets people talking about change and problems to it. Also sucks key players in and say, "Oh man, that'd be a heck of a change." They begin to understand the dynamic and can sympathize with the effort associated with doing something, and it creates a positive effect on your project. So that can be really useful just by getting them to participate in the process associated with your project. But your real goal is associated with managing change. This is a concrete way to manage it. I'm sorry, my slides look better on my computer. See, Apple's not good for everything. So, all right, so what do we do? What are the steps that we need to try to recoup our project if we're struggling and seeing that it's beginning to drift? Again, scope achievable. If your scope is not achievable, you need to revisit the scope and then rescope. Do you have agreement on, these things that I said before, but we have agreement on the what success looks like? Do we have agreement on what the deliverables of the project are? Actually, I didn't write this on there, I think. And so these are the kinds of things, so all the stuff that we talked about in the methodologies, so the notion of, let me look at it myself, your goals and objectives, your scope, deliverables, success criteria, any assumptions written in the charter, so that you've got those locked down and they were signed off on. So you had commitment from key stakeholders and sponsor. So that, let me tell you, that front-loaded effort, that can take a long time. Because the tussling that you're experiencing now happened like months ago. So they had a chance to go at it with one another around the objectives, the deliverables, and success. So you could front-load those kinds of decisions, which are natural. However, if that didn't happen, you have to do it here. And so you try to get agreement on all of those key things. And one of the things that is very useful in working with a group of stakeholders and sponsors is really determining if creating basically a kind of a roadmap of thresholds or success indicators. So for example, let me be specific. So this project is successful if we affect a 10% reduction in carbon and I'm just making stuff up. But you know, so you have concrete specific things, and you have measures, you know, like thresholds that, okay, we're successful, bam, we just hit 10%. Okay, we're successful. Or we're at 5%. How much more time do we have? Well, we're going to do something radical and make this. You know, so you have these kind of metrics that key people can look at, because they're not going to look at a lot, right? So they're going to look at, you know, things that they can understand and grasp that are related to the project. Also, you might want to consider, I can talk about that more if you'd like later, if you have any questions about that. I'm trying to move on. Governance, decisions, and triggers. So, for example, let's take a cost one. So, for example, if we deplete 1/3 of the budget by X date, we know we need to go back for additional funding. You know, so that's a decision that and a trigger that they know they need to make. So think creatively about the triggers. And so basically, it's kind of the notion of a roadmap. You know, so you have these things that, okay, I want them to decide the following things. You know, lay them out, and any conditions associated with them. So those conditions are triggers, and so that they can make decisions and move your project forward. And sometimes you can build these into the project schedule, or sometimes separate them out and just have them for interactions with stakeholders and sponsors. Other key thing, let me go back to that. So as you're rebuilding, you know, if you look at your scope again, look at your schedule, mainly your scope, you want to make sure you get alignment. So you want to get stakeholders and align. Like, if we're not doing this again, not in the same way at least, we're going to actually get alignment and agreement, you know, as much as you can get. Even if you're not getting agreement, document that too. That's a risk. And so that you nail that down, and then you move on. What you move on to, because you want to reduce ambiguity in your project and uncertainty, so you go ahead and do, you know, a version of a risk plan. You don't have to do anything fancy with a risk plan or an issue management plan. You just simply don't have to do anything fancy. Excel, awesome. Actually, almost, I would say 90% of, that might be too low, 95% of all risk plans are Excel documents. You just, you know, columns and words, maybe some colors to say if it's green, red, or yellow. Green is good, red's bad. And then also a change control process. Some process for managing change. It doesn't even have to be what I described. That's the normal change control process. But some process of managing change in your projects, you have to like somehow get your arms around it, or otherwise it's happening around you and you're just watching it happen. And then communication. Communication piece is important because you need to establish a consistent message. So if you're having, you know, if you've gone through this effort to try to restart things or to redefine certain parts of your projects, get agreement, you want to message that, and you want to ensure that it's done consistently, so that as much as you can, so there's not a lot of organizational spin. Organizational B says it this way, organizational C says it that way. Some of that you can't control, and sometimes you're just going to let it happen because you just, you know, I got them to agree, so that's a victory on itself. But if you can, try to create consistency in the messaging. This notion of a communication plan. So believe it or not, that communication is often planned in projects. So what that really means is we're going to communicate. We're going to hold meetings every week by so and so and so. We are going to email as our main vehicle of alerting people to blah blah blah. You know, you talk about the tools you use and the ways you're going to communicate with people and what information is going to be in those communications. So all of that is kind of spec'd out, but again, that could be considered a lot of overhead. And so, what you want to do anytime you're reinvigorating a project, the need for communication goes up. And so people want, you know, they're more hyped about the situation suddenly. And so there's more frequent communication needed. So you want to exploit that dynamic that happens. You know, if you think about it, when trouble happens, there's more communication about that trouble for a period of time, then it dies back down. And so you'll want to do that. Other key thing is to hold a, if you hadn't done it before, you want to hold a kickoff meeting. If you've done it before, you want to have a re-kickoff meeting. And a kickoff meeting is where it's your opportunity to, again, to talk about these are the goals, this is our scope, these are our assumptions, these are our success criteria, these are our deliverables, etc. Crystal clear, consistently delivered throughout the entirety of the project. And so you told them, You're telling them again, and you're going to tell them again later. You know, so you stay on point, on mission, have great clarity around those key items. And even if they change, and they will change, that you have a process now for managing that change and can then re-communicate what that change is. Another key thing people like in this kind of scenario is that if you can get a victory out early, you know, as a result of our, you know, re-clarifying our scope statement and making the following changes, we were able to do X. You know, so if you can engineer something like that, that's awesome if you can pull that off. Sometimes it's not possible. So that's what I have in terms of looking at your project, kind of its mid-life cycle, you know, feeling a little despair, and looking for ways to, like, how can we actually get this back in a situation. Those are the steps I'll recommend. I'll provide this as a PDF to you, so I can send that to you. Let's quickly talk about tools, although I have zero notion of time right now.
We're doing great. It's 2:30. It's a little bit before 2:30.
Okay. So let's talk about tools. Let me just say generally the most used tool in a waterfall situation is by far Microsoft Project Managing Schedule. By far. Now, would I recommend that to you? Not necessarily. I don't necessarily recommend that you use Microsoft Project. I always have. Now, if you're familiar with it, you should definitely take a look at it. It's fairly easy to use. However, it does require pretty intense management. Like, you need to stay all over your project schedule if you're going to use it. The default tool that every project manager uses, every organization usually has, is Excel. Excel is like a wonder tool. It not only does math for you, it makes it super easy. It's like, oh man, that's like, do they let you use Excel in grad school? Because I would totally cheat with Excel. But you know, you can do all kinds of analysis and lots of things. You can even create a Gantt chart with Excel. And so, but it's great for just tracking things, and it's the simplest tool. So here's the trick with tools, and that's why I didn't write anything down on this list. Tools have, they come with overhead. People tend to become obsessed with their tool. People insist that their tool be used. And it's like your job is to actually get things done. Tool just certainly helps. You need to find a tool that works for you. I have two sets of tools. I have the tools that I use to make me look like a genius when I'm working on different companies. So I work with a lot of companies in downtown San Francisco. I hardly ever leave downtown San Francisco for my consulting work. And so I have the tools, suites of tools that I personally use. And then I have the tools that they have that they provide for you. And so most companies have some version of Office, mostly. And so so that's what I use. I use, you know, I'll use their tool set. I also use a tool called Visio, staying in the Microsoft suite for a moment. A lot of people don't like to read, especially executives, and they're super busy. Some do, some shocking. The last consulting gig I did, the people really read the stuff. I was shocked. Executives like read the report. So I don't know when you had time to read that. I don't know if you ever sleep, but they literally read it. Most organizations actually, you need to write in the business form, which is short, intense, you know, communication. They're not going to read a long document. So bullet points, well-crafted words, keep it short, and visual. And so I had to create a report for a group of executives who were too busy to read anything. But I had lots of information to convey, so what I did, I had to create a visual representation with narrative of a report. And so so that's what I did. And so I did use Visio for that. Other people use, you know, Adobe tools to make pretty reports. You know, so, you know, visual tools that report information are powerful. People otherwise won't read long paragraphs of things unless you insist. So, you know, just as a style, keep your communication business oriented, which is short, sweet, bulleted. that's an important thing for you, I think. But other tools that you might consider using. So I mentioned Excel, I mentioned Project. There are other tools I use a tool called MindJet. It's just a tool that is used for, it's a mind map. Now that might feel chaotic and doesn't feel structured, but I have literally launched a product, healthcare product, using a tool called MindJet. What it is, and I don't know if you're familiar with mind mapping software, but it kind of has a central topic, and then around the central topic you build your headers and then subs off of that. You can I have met in a room with a bunch of stakeholders and subject matter experts, using a mind map, captured all their input into a document I had already created, structure I already created, and then click the button, bam, I had a structured Word document, literally. Or I've taken, so it's not a document I'm producing, not a narrative document, it's a timeline. So I do the same thing, capturing dates, durations, contributors, and relationships. This has to happen first, then the second. And same thing, click a button, bam, Gantt chart. And so those are very powerful tools. And they're a little newer, so people aren't familiar with them. But they are devastatingly powerful, and because they help take, they delinearize topics. So for example, if you're doing a project charter, if you're doing it in a Word document, what are you going to do? You're going to you're going to feel compelled to go, let's start at the top and we get at the bottom. But if you're looking at the same thing in a mind map, you might actually bounce around, and that might be beneficial to the outcome. And so that's a useful tool. Other tools that people use. You can use tools like, again, you have to be mindful of your organization, because a lot of IT organizations are shut down, and there's no way you're using an outside tool, period. But if you can use Basecamp. These are tools that I are constantly thrown at me from a lot of developers. I often work for the developers, and they want to use Basecamp or a tool called Rike, which is probably the strongest of them so far. I have to evaluate lots of tools, so that's a very strong tool because it's flexible in how you describe things, but it outputs structure. So I like things that allow you to capture things in a flexible way, and then bam, you can organize it to kind of linear structure that makes a lot of sense. So so those are kinds of tools. Other tools, if you don't, OneNote is a powerful tool for collecting things, super powerful, usually available. Mac PC, I think it's on a Mac. I believe it is on a Mac. Is OneNote on a Mac?
I don't think so.
Well, if you're in the PC world, you're in luck. But that's a tool because it allows you to accumulate information, relate things, keep things together. Really useful for your self-management. So you're managing, keeping track of things for yourself on your project. So it's a very good tool, and tools like it. What's the other? Evernote is its analog to it. But OneNote is free. And so that's why I like it. Is it free? Yeah, I think it is free. So any questions about tools or about the process generally? I've covered lots of material. I know, and given that the group is probably pretty much relatively new to project management, this was not a 101 course. It was more of you're treating you like a kind of junior consultant, and this is what you might consider in order to deal with your project. In terms of project management, let me just say this. There are tremendous bodies of knowledge for projects. So you can go out, and there's a book, the 5th edition of the PMBOK, the Project Manager's, what is it, PMBOK? Oh, Project Management Body of Knowledge. It's out there. Now that's an overwhelming book. So if you thought you were going to know about project management, you pick up that book and you might put it right back down. But what you do with that book is you cherry pick things that you would use. You don't use everything in the PMBOK. That would be utterly overwhelming. But what you can do is say, I will use this, this, and this. Already well thought out, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. You can do the same with Agile. This is the Agile Manifesto. Agile is more fragmented. There are different versions of Agile is a header for multiple methodologies for managing projects. The most popular one to look at would be Scrum. You can Google that, Agile Scrum, and see lots of things that may or may not be useful to you. But it is no new company I know coming on board is Waterfall. Waterfall is beginning to fade from the earth, except in government, and maybe some large organizations that struggle to move away from it because they've got so much invested in it. But even many large organizations are moving away from it. I did the first Agile pilot at Walmart, and that was 2010. So now they're fully Agile. And so, so big organizations are actually starting to move to this methodology. So you're in Waterfall now, it's a good thing to know, but if you were to continue in this profession as a project manager working in the private sector, you would need to know Agile. So you can get that, and there's one more body of knowledge that we didn't talk about, that if you collect requirements, write anything, there's a business analysis body of knowledge. And that can be really useful because it talks about the process of collecting and managing requirements. It is often a project manager has both hats on. You're both a project manager and you're a business analyst. The analyst part is that you're getting the requirements, you're writing them down, you're translating them from different experts into a document. And so that can be a very useful body of knowledge as well to be exposed to. So that's it. So I'll leave it open for questions if you have any.
Excellent. We've already gotten some coming in, and really how we'll do this is those of you who have written questions already, we'll start with those. If anyone wants to raise their hand, then I can unmute you and you can speak directly to Dexter. Otherwise, keep on writing in your questions. So just to start with, we had a few that came in just regarding tools. As you were speaking about tools, Drew up in the North Coast asked about a tool called Kirika. I don't know if you've ever used that or had any thoughts on that. Yeah. I don't know what it is either, so no thoughts there.
I'll Google it and see.
Okay. And then also we had a few requests just because you were bouncing through the list of tools, if maybe you could actually get us a list of the tools since we don't have anything actually up on the PowerPoint. Anyone?
I think I got one.
Okay. I was going to say we can probably share that, or
actually,
if you had
also,
any thoughts.
Before I send this document, I'll write in a bunch of tools.
Okay. We would love that. And then more of a general project management question. What is the appropriate way to deal with a supervisor or person above you that is ineffective or unsupportive, but you're supposed to respect and take authority from them?
Yes.
Tricky question.
Yes. So is that person a program sponsor?
That could be, yeah. A lot of times with our projects, the members are working with multiple stakeholders. They might be working with a local government who isn't 100% engaged in the project, and so it's hard to get them to sit down or to be responsive or to really engage to the level that you want them to. So that's a good example.
Well, so again, I mentioned as a project manager, you're not always going to be super popular, always, but you hope to be respected. And so in those kinds of situations, it is incumbent upon you to actually highlight that as a risk or an issue. And I would describe that, again, you have to craft it very wisely, but effectively, sitting in the room here together, I would say that their lack of response is a risk to the success of the project deliverables. And I would say what they are. And it doesn't have to be, that may feel uncomfortable to you, but I've done that, and I do that all the time. But it is a challenging situation, but you have to call it out because that's your role. Part of your role is, you still like communication and understanding, and so I think people need to understand that you're not getting the kind of support you need on the project to achieve the goals of the project because you're about the project.
Any thoughts from the room? Have any of you encountered this? And I know with YOLO it was hard to get some people just in to talk and have interviews. Sort of what strategies did you use? Or
I don't know. All this has been like a summary of both of our projects combined on both extremes, so it's hard to focus on any one part. So we definitely found a bit of reluctance at first because we had a project supervisor who wasn't too detailed in what they wanted and left it very open to us. So we eventually kind of accepted that role, but we still want to make sure that we're going in the right path. Because our supervisor here, we want to make sure that we're giving them a deliverable in the end. That's what they want, but it's very hard to get them to comment on it. And we've tried different strategies of doing it for them and giving them options, or kind of trying to do it in a phone call, and it's never a lot. And we've kind of been able to accept that in our project, and it's okay. But I know in some projects it's not always okay to not get that feedback.
Is it possible? So in those scenarios, you will be in those scenarios multiple times, fortunately. So in those scenarios, what I've always done is try to get that. I try to do FaceTime as much as possible. I don't mean the Apple tool. I mean literally. So when you do those meetings, you're trying to get them to, say you wrote a document for them, and you get them to evaluate it. Are you doing that on the phone, or are you doing that in person?
A lot of times it's emailing them and then asking them the feedback, and they never respond to the emails, and so then it'll come in a call, and then you'll usually get something, but not a lot.
Is it possible for you to meet this person in person? That is.
Yeah, we require driving over, but it could be done. It's just it's hard to even get a meeting with them as well.
Yeah. I mentioned that sometimes I will literally hang out. Just so I can personally meet the person. It's easy to ignore someone you don't know. So it's a little harder to ignore someone who you've met and established before. And so, so I don't know if that actually works for you. That may not actually be a tactic.
It's difficult, but because they're in the woodland and their office is pretty
most of us don't work in the offices of our project providers, which is another thing too, because a lot of the communications from other offices, so you can't necessarily hound them as easily.
This is true, and I totally understand that. That's not unusual. So you might work out of 3 offices, like my last project, big project in San Mateo, Silicon Valley, somewhere in the Silicon Valley, and then Sacramento. And so if I needed to track someone down out of the Silicon Valley office, I literally drove there and tried to find out where they were. And I would have to, and it could be just 5 minutes. But I know that it's 5 important minutes of making, hey, you so-and-so, I'm Dexter, and I wanted to talk to you about so-and-so. Maybe this isn't a good time, but can we talk later this week? I just try to pounce them in a, as professionally as possible.
Very professional way.
So I can. And if you're not able to actually do it yourself, then your only choice is to. So if you can't, there's no one that you can escalate. They're the highest in their organization. You can't escalate above. So you need to escalate a different way. And so sometimes that means having someone higher in the program itself make the call. And so it's that kind of thing. But you have to somehow break through that, because it has to happen, right? If you don't, what happens if you don't actually get this person's feedback? The deliverable quality could be an issue, or they could say, well, that's not what we agreed. That's not what I wanted. They can say that in part because they never had to sign off on a scope or deliverables or what success looks like, And so you might want to cut to the chase also and get them to. And if they're that hard to get to, and you're doing something granular, like I need you to get your input on. I'm not exactly sure what you're working on with this, but if it's something that's a specific task, or is it a broader driving goal?
It's usually broader, I would say.
Okay.
And will shape the rest of the work we do.
Okay, awesome.
We want to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is worthy of a somehow sideways escalation of some kind, or a I'm here. Hi. I understand you like this McDonald's. Me too. That's worked for me in the past. But also when that doesn't work, I escalate. You have no choice.
Sort of in that same vein, I know that this is advice that I have even used with some of the members in the past, is if you're having problems, to come to someone with solutions. So don't come with a problem, come with a solution.
Yes.
But how responsible are they to come with this solution and having that solution at hand in the cases when you're calling someone out or saying, hey, you know, this is a problem, we need to address this. Should they always have a solution? Is that something where sometimes you just need to acknowledge the problem and move on? What would your advice be around that?
It actually depends on the situation. However, I'm biased, where I was taught that if you identify a problem, you better have a solution. And so I always try to have a solution ready. If appropriate, sometimes it's utterly inappropriate for you to have a solution proposed for this person or group, and you should be able to know the difference. And so, but yes, if it's possible for you to come with a solution, definitely do that. Yeah.
Another question from the San Francisco team. If they are not project managers, what are some words of wisdom of how to work well with their project managers?
Managing
up.
Yeah. It depends on the nature of the relationship. So, for example, is this person, do they walk in not liking you, or so what is that the crux? What's the crux of the issue? Well, understand what that is. So what's their, if they have a beef with you, or you just feel generally that we don't really have just a great relationship, then, you know, one way, if you don't have a relationship with someone, is to establish one, you know, and you know, a rapport. You know, even the most dysfunctional team possible, and I've worked on these teams, the most dysfunctional team, it's much easier to work with someone that you disagree with but you understand. And so you can cultivate understanding in some way with an individual. It is easier to work with them, even if you utterly disagree with them on other things, but you can totally work with them. And so that is a skill that will become in handy, because obviously you're not going to work in organizations where you like everybody, but you can get to know people a little better and understand them a little better. Though your outcomes and behaviors and decisions may be different than theirs, but at least you can understand them.
Any thoughts from anyone in the room or any questions?
I'm curious if you have any tips for projects with like intentionally flexible end scopes, and how to best deal with that ambiguity that's kind of intentionally there.
Yes.
It's not necessarily an issue.
I would manage that project from an Agile perspective, and what I mean by that is that, so, for example, did you have a scope? Like, this is the area we're working, some general notion of scope. These are the areas we're working in. And so I would say each time that we talk about scope, say, okay, these are, what do you want to get accomplished within the next 2 months or a month, whatever. So decide on what can be delivered. So if they can agree on a flexible scope, say, okay, we know that in the next month or two we want the following things to happen. Okay, then guess what? You have an iteration, a sprint. Say, then from now until a month from now, we're going to work on delivering the following things, and hopefully those don't change, those things that you're trying to deliver within that period of time, but they might. If it does change while you're working on it, often what's decided is that it goes into the next sprint. So again, a sprint in the Agile methodology, you take a block of work and you chop it up. It's meant to handle change, because it's not locked down. And so, but you take a chunk of that work and say, okay, we're going to focus on this for 2 months or whatever. A sprint is usually shorter than that, but we're in policy world, so it may take a little longer. And so you just focus on that, and then you try to deliver those things. Again, if something changes in that 2-month period, it's either yanked from the sprint, something just dropped in, or you just do that in the next sprint. It gets added to the next sprint. And so that methodology is well suited to change. It is meant to handle change.
Excellent. One last question, it looks like. Recommendations for good certified Scrum Masters courses. Is the certification worth it without a lot of practice behind it?
The certification. If you've never been exposed to Scrum, then spending a day or two getting certified certainly can't hurt. It'll expose you to it. you won't necessarily come out like, I am now ready to run all my projects Agile. Same with the PMP. It's like you're not going to, which is the certification for Waterfall, still an important one. You're not going to come out like, I'm now ready to master all projects. Oh no. At least you'll be exposed to the information. And that's what the certification, I think, is good for, the exposure.
Excellent. I think that answered all of the questions that we had out there. I hope, if it's okay with you, Dexter, we can share your information, and if any other questions come up, or if anyone had a more private question, maybe they can get in touch with you that way to follow up.
That'd be fine. I actually hoped, I just ran out of time myself personally, to I've talked about lots of forms, like, for example, the risk log and the issue log. Give you a template. Here's a template for that. So you don't have to go out and, although these things are eminently Googleable, you can go out and find a risk register like that. So you can Google and find these things, but these are also, I would suggest that, but I have ones that I often use that may be useful.
Just following up on that risk register, how do you usually use it, like if you're working in between organizations and have identified the risks and you've mapped them out? How do you make sure that you're not just mapping them out, that you're still sharing those risks with them in a professional manner that says, hey, I'd really like to resolve these, but I'm not trying to send you a list of complaints or potential problems that I see coming down the line?
So let me understand, do you actually have any regular meetings with your folks, or it's just kind of ad hoc?
With our second project, our sponsor is the Air District, but we do a lot of work that helps the Tree Foundation, and so we're not with them on a constant basis, and they've gone through a lot of transitions in their own management and keep assigning us to different people, so we kind of have to regain control and make sure that everyone's responsibilities are for sure known. And every attempt we've had of being like, can we make sure we're going through this proposal together and that all responsibilities are assumed, they usually want to say, oh, well, I'll take it and to show it to so-and-so and get back to you. So it's a lot of delayed confirmation of what everyone's roles and how far they want to go, because we're in control of the project and we know what we need to do, but it's kind of making sure they know what they want to do for us and where we can go and do things without their needed participation. It's like making them decide what their confirmed role is.
Right.
Yeah.
So but are you able to have regular meetings with them? Is that a possibility?
Yeah. I mean, we could go over there.
It's not too far.
Yeah, it depends on.
Can you do it once a week or twice a week?
Probably more like once a week.
Okay, once a week would be better. Obviously, that would be better. So I would actually craft an agenda with action items and also your risks on them, like existing risks. And so one of the things I would do is that I would review, just as a normal part of the effort, I would review where we stand with regard to our risks and issues. And sometimes, I would definitely do that in any action items. So things that we said we're going to do, they've been captured, and I wanted to check and see where we are on this because we talked about it last week. It's that kind of thing. So meetings can actually be really useful if they're focused like a laser on your project topics. And they don't even have to be long. They can be like max half hour, as you're getting over those things. And so you don't try to solve the problems in your meeting. You identify the problems, you capture the problems, you can bring them up next time, and then follow with them offline. But if you think the only time I'm ever going to see this person is in this meeting, then you actually you can talk about it in that meeting. Practically, like, I won't see you again, but I will talk. So I'm going to talk to you about it. But otherwise, I would use the meeting as a way to focus everything on, like a laser on my project, to drive things. And so that can be extremely useful. And people seeing issues and risks, that is not an insult. These are literally issues and risks associated with getting work done. This is not personal. And you can try to depersonalize it in your description.
What about when they because we've had times I feel like when we've given them a risk or an issue and they kind of downplay it, it's not too big of an issue, and ultimately it's their program and their project. So in that case, what would you do if you feel like it's a risk, but if they don't think it's too big of a risk? Is it more so because it's their program or their project, you just kind of leave it as it is?
Are they trying to say that it's not a risk at all, or just
not necessarily not a risk at all, but it's just kind of like, oh, well, we can work around it.
Go figure it out.
Yeah.
Naturally kind of thing.
I was actually still counted as a risk but I might have a score that I assign to risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if you feel like I think it's a 5, you think it's a 1, how about we say it's a 3? You know, or if you need to capitulate completely just to keep it on there, so I'll say it's a 1, but I do believe this is a risk. You know, you know, you still hold your ground, but you know, if you see that holding it as a 5, for example, will burn your relationship, people like, because risks are typically held at an individual level. They're assigned to someone, and so that they feel personally exposed. You might want to abandon that if possible and hold it at an organizational level so that people don't feel like, oh, you're talking about me.
Well, how would you manage that in a situation when you're trying to have a cordial discussion about risks and issues and somebody in the team takes it personally and wants to, you know, run personal attacks on you or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are some of the scenarios for that?
So if someone, if you're calling out risk and issues, first have it have a structured part of your agenda if this is a meeting like that. Is it, or is?
I mean, we don't do that necessarily.
Okay. All right. So if you're going to have a conversation about risk and issues, among other things, don't start with risk and issues, right? So try to get to the rest of your conversation, and then have that like at least 2/3 down your agenda, and then you bring them up. And then if someone goes ballistic because you brought up a legitimate risk or issue, and then the tactics around conflict resolution, the notion that I understand that you're upset. This issue is related to this particular issue. I mean, we're talking about this issue because it's related to the success of our project, and we know that you need to personalize it and make it about the project. And so, because you can't actually manage that other person's reaction, what you can do is manage your reaction to that person, and so that you can make sure that they are not going after, you know, that you're not the one, you're not joining them in the personal attacks. You're keeping it focused on the issues. And then when you leave the meeting, you know, like go stomp out, kick something, you know, but you know, you're not going to join in the personal stuff. Yeah. And then if, you know, they continue to do that, is this part of the team member or is this
This is like a hypothetical.
Hypothetical, okay, yeah. And then, you know, there's some people that, you know, that usually is enough. And then if you need to have a conversation with that person or their supervisor, if you don't think that you can have a civil conversation with them or they can have one with you. And then, you know, I would escalate because basically, again, you're about the success. You're trying to win and successfully manage your project. So if you see that something, even a relationship that's gone bad, is impeding that, it's on you to, I wouldn't flag that as a risk or an issue. But I would definitely escalate and say that this relationship is starting to sour in a way that's harm of the project. And I would say to the supervisor, or if that doesn't work, you need to come in at a different level. I would say at the program level so they can call. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We're just hitting about 3 p.m. as well, so I know some people have other things on their schedule, including you probably, hiding from work. But we definitely appreciate you coming in here, and I think that there was a lot of very, very valuable information, and everyone gained a lot. So thank you. And again, for those of you on phone, we will follow up with the PowerPoint eventually, as well as Dexter's information. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, we can hopefully take care of those for you. But thank you so much for attending today. We'll talk to you soon.